Well, during the CNN town hall meeting last week that President Biden had, he was asked if the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. Well, in response, he said more than once that we would, adding that, quote, we have a commitment to do that, end quote. Statements that President Biden has made were countered by administration officials that have kind of walked back those statements. Joining me now to talk about this and the total disaster that is President Biden's Taiwan policy is China expert Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. He can be found on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, but right now you can find him in the studio with me. Gordon, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's great to be here.
Well, it's good to have you in studio. Let's talk about this. The president was clear. In fact, you said he was clearer on our policy toward Taiwan than what we've seen in decades.
Yes, and this was not the only time that President Biden did that. He had a conversation with George Stephanopoulos of ABC News in August, and he clearly said then, we're going to defend Taiwan like we're going to defend our NATO partners, like Japan, like South Korea. That was unambiguous. But what we had was the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki. Day afterwards, we had the defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, State Department spokesman, Ned Price. They just contradicted the president. So, constitutionally, the president makes foreign policy, but now it looks like it's Jen Psaki is the one who's calling the tune.
So how does China interpret that?
China, we can see this from a number of comments from Chinese officials, are just ecstatic. So, for instance, Chen Weihua, who is the European bureau chief for China Daily, which is a Communist Party official publication, said, Biden's too old. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He likes to bluff, which is a real indication that the Chinese leaders look at this and say there is just disarray at the top of the Biden administration. And the reason why that's important is because they might be impelled to act if they can get away with it.
Do you think China's willing to take the risk now to make a move on Taiwan?
Normally I wouldn't, and there are some reasons for stability, but the problem is that Xi Jinping's a very bold leader. He has a low threshold of risk, and I think he can take us by surprise. And it's not just a question of a planned invasion. What I think is really dangerous is accidental encounter in the Taiwan Strait. Right. China's been maneuvering very belligerently, both in the air and on the sea surface. So that could very well be what causes this. And I think the probability of war is much higher than policymakers in Washington think.
So more of an accidental incident that triggers.
Yes, and we saw this on April 1st, 2001, early days of the administration of George W. Bush, where a fast-flying Chinese jet clipped the wing of our EP-3 U.S. Navy reconnaissance plane. That was a disaster.
Right. I was actually on the Hill this morning, meeting with some members, and we were discussing China. And we were discussing this very issue of what might happen if China made a move on Taiwan. One of the concerns is that the American public would not have the stomach for an engagement with China. And given China's growing military power, we don't have the superiority that we once had. Our battle groups, if we lost an aircraft carrier, what impact would that have on the psyche of Americans in terms of having a military engagement with China?
Yeah. There was a recent poll, I think it was done by Pew or somebody, who said that the majority of Americans would believe that the United States should defend Taiwan. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to it, we wouldn't know. What I'm worried about is the psyche of the U.S. Navy, where you have an officer corps that seems defeated. And also, we know that the Navy is a very troubled institution. You had the fire at the Bonhomme Richard, right. Complete loss of the ship last year, and those two destroyer accidents in 2017, really a sign of a very sick institution.
Yeah, we've actually seen, I think it was Senator Tom Cotton and others that did their own evaluation of the Navy, showing that we've got some serious leadership issues there because we've been focusing on these social policies as opposed to preparing our Navy to fight military battles.
Right. I mean, it's that which is really troubling because, when you have the President of the United States saying the number one threat is climate change, and then with all these gender battles and that they're conducting throughout the armed services, and we know the Navy, they've had trouble on all sorts of fronts. I mean, they can't even get their aircraft carrier, the Ford, into battle shape. So this is a real problem that runs through the Navy from top to the bottom.
So Gordon Chang, let's switch gears a little bit, staying on China, but away from the military issue in Taiwan to the economic issue and the trade issue with China. And right now, where we've got this supply chain disruption, does this not tell us that we need different trade partners than China?
Well, it certainly does. I mean, when you have something like 80 container ships outside of Long Beach, and this is not just a container ship problem, bulk carriers also have these severe supply disruptions. And that means, Vice President Harris, she was in Singapore in August, and she said right then, look, buy your Christmas presents now, because she knew that this was going to be serious. We should be having Christmas. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take, but clearly we should be making our stuff on this side of the Pacific.
Right. Do we have to buy stuff from China? Can't we find some other place to manufacture these goods?
Well, we certainly can. First of all, in the U.S., but also in Central America, because we've got these caravans that are pressuring our southern border. Exactly. This is not Mexico. These are people from the Central American countries because their societies were destabilized when factories left for China. Well, if we had the factories come back, we'd have prosperous societies there, we wouldn't have the problems, and we wouldn't have the caravans.
Right, so some of that manufacturing that's taking place over in China, where they're using the profits to build a military to stand up against us, if we did trade with Central and South America, we solve several problems.
We'd solve a lot of problems. And, we have an administration that tells us that climate change, well, look, if you have those 15 of the largest container ships pour more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than all the world's cars. So you would think that this administration would be saying, let's sort of shorten our supply chains, let's put less carbon in the air, let's manufacture stuff on this side of the Pacific.
Well, and you think of some of these critical manufacturing products. I mean, the PPE, the personal protective equipment that we weren't able to get our hands on, that China even kind of threatened that they weren't going to get it to us.
And China nationalized an American factory making the N95 masks. We heard Beijing specifically talk about trying to throw America into, quote, the mighty sea of coronavirus. So we do have these critical vulnerabilities where China makes something like 90% of the pharmaceuticals we use, plus also the active pharmaceutical ingredients. I don't know why we do this.
What would it take to see that type of manufacturing come back to this hemisphere?
It would take presidential leadership. President Trump, in his last year, started down the path of industrial policy. And I know a lot of people don't like it, but we can't rely on China for this. So he had that $665 million loan to Eastman Kodak to make active pharmaceutical ingredients. Now, that was a misfire, but we need to do more of that, which means we need to have the president invoke the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, make the stuff here.
And then, for instance, countries like Honduras, Guatemala, those countries where we're supposedly from that triangle, we're getting these immigrants coming here, migrating here because they don't have, according to the administration, they don't have economic opportunity there.
Yeah, but you have the vice president who's supposed to be in charge of this, and she talks about root cause. And when she talks about root cause, it's just throwing American money into the Northern Triangle. Well, that's not the root cause. The root cause is, as you point out, it's having factories there, having a viable, self-sustaining society. Now, we can help by having, for instance, changing our free trade agreement with the region, CAFTA. And if we just make a few changes, that would encourage factories to go over to the Northern Triangle.
Right, and we could also encourage through our tax policy. This administration talking about taxing subsidiaries that are in other countries. You could have a differing tax rate depending on what hemisphere it's in.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many incentives that we can give, and we absolutely have to do this because, as you point out, China cannot threaten the U.S. without our money, and we're shoveling money there with trade, with investment, and I just think that history's going to look back at us and say we're crazy.
By the way, that stand mug, not made in China, made in the U.S., 15 ounces of ceramic, and it's all yours here in the U.S. And folks, you can get one too. Go to TonyPerkins.com. Gordon, great to have you in the program today.
Oh, it was so much fun, Tony. Thank you.